It's Barbara Simpson on Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
Barbara Simpson right here, hour number 2, as we proceed this afternoon on Hot Talk 560 KSFO. And I invite you to be part of it because we have a guest now that I am very, very anxious to have you hear. She's going to put into words some things that we have talked about, talked around, been concerned about for a very long time, and I urge you, absolutely urge you, to pay attention to this. Before I introduce my guest, Elizabeth Nickson, I want to give you the story I found from the Arizona Daily Star on the 23rd of October. It's an Associated Press story out of Albuquerque that an environmental advocacy group has proposed that federal officials set aside millions of acres in Arizona and New Mexico for a Jaguar Reintroduction program. A representative of the Center for Biological Diversity told U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that the endangered cats need more than 1,300 square miles the agency proposed in August, but needs more. And it needs a reintroduction program that includes the 2 states and similar to the one for the Mexican gray wolves, which was a farce to begin with. The group asked for critical habitat to be designated in parts of the Gila National Forest and parts of Arizona. By the by, those parts of Arizona are Pima County, Santa Cruz County, and Cochise County, and also New Mexico's Hidalgo County. By the way, those counties in Arizona are the prime areas for illegals to come into this country. We know that from all the work we've done on that subject. Karen Cowan, Executive Director of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association, said the idea is ridiculous. There is no need to add land restrictions for an animal that can no longer survive in the region. There is no evidence that there have ever been female jaguars in the region. Besides, their natural habitat is Brazil. What part of the Gila National Forest resembles Brazil? Livestock owners say that any more restrictions on land use would harm the economy. So this is out there, and it fits perfectly with what we're discussing with my guest right now. Her name is Elizabeth Nickson. Her last name is spelled Nickson. She's a columnist, investigative journalist, also a novelist. She was the European Bureau Chief of Life magazine, reporter for Time, has written for many international publications, interviewed just every kind of person you can think of, politicians, show business, royalty, torture victims, political prisoners, and criminals. During the first Gulf War, she oversaw life photographers in the field. There's a book out now that caught my eye, and you can tell by the title why it did. Eco-Fascists, How Radical Conservationists Are Destroying Our Natural Heritage. Looking at your book, Elizabeth, it is absolutely shocking because you put all of this together of what's happening to the land in this country by people who think they're protecting it.
Yes, and Barbara, I was in Hidalgo County last May, and I heard about the Jaguar Reintroduction and spoke to some of the ranchers there, and they'd done their own research and found that jaguars can't survive in that desert because they're water-based creatures, and the only jaguars in that part of the world are in Mexico at a conflux of 3 rivers, and they believe that male jaguars have been hunting from that part of Mexico up into Arizona and New Mexico, but they don't stay because it's not habitable for them. So this is a terrible thing that they're trying down there.
But isn't it just another addition to the list of they're trying to get people off of land, to get ranchers off of land, to get tourists off of land, to put all of this and more land under government control?
Yes, well, that's exactly why they're doing it. They don't. The animals, or so-called endangered species, are merely a proxy to take land.
Who's behind behind it? Where does it come from? Do you have a sense of that? And I'm asking you a big question there because I know it's a huge question.
Well, I know that the Jaguar comes out of the Rewilding Institute. Dave Foreman, who's the guy who came up with the whole idea of the Wildlands Network, which I'm sure you've talked about with your listeners because it's been accreting in chunks for the last 20 years, semi-formally, but before that, informally. Since I think the 60s, some of the agencies were told to try to get as much private land out of the hands of landowners and turn it public. I mean, this has been a plan that's been in operation for a very long time, and they have been enormously successful beyond their wildest dreams. My calculation is that they've got about 800 million acres in the continental U.S., well, I guess it would include Alaska, under conservation. And they're after another 213 million BLM lands, part of which would probably be the Jaguar habitat. So they're close to 50%
of the land in the country.
Yeah.
Now, are they husbanding the land well? In other words, it's land that's public land. They're taking care of it.
Well, I mean, that's the really different thing that I contribute to the conversation in my book, because it's been going on long enough that some of the federal agencies and a lot of the universities that are in ranching and forestry counties have started to audit the lands that have been put aside. And they're finding that they're dying. The forests are dying, and the ranges that have been taken, have had cattle taken off them, are dying too.
So in other words, they're really not doing to the land or taking care of the land in a way that will keep it, if you will, healthy, right?
Yeah, and it's because they use this new form of biology called conservation biology.
What is that?
It was invented, basically. It was in California in 1978 at the University of California, San Diego, and that was the first event in 1978 that formed it, and it was created deliberately as a science that had one assumption going in, which was that man was predating and destroying the land. And so if you have that assumption going in, if that's your first principle, as it were, then what you're going to find is that man is destroying land. So they have marched this science through all of the institutions of government, and I would say, and I mean not me saying this, but most of the people I've talked to say that biology departments are largely taken over by this false construct, and as such are determining the use of our natural resources. And my thesis is that that's why commodities have gone up 600% in the last 10 years, because we've created artificial shortages, and we've also created or stopped people creating wealth from those resources. So as a result, we've critically lost rural population. Between 40 and 50 million people have been driven off their lands and out of the rural areas, and these are people who actually worked in the country. They're not people that go there to rent the view or,
Now let me ask you this. When you say they've been driven off their land, what are the kinds of things that happen to them that drive them off their land?
Well, I think the best way to explain it is, especially for an urban audience, is think of a town that has a prestigious private college as its kind of keystone industry. So in that college, there are 200 full professors with, all the credits that they have. And around those 200 full professors is an entire university with adjunct and lecturers and administration and libraries and maintenance and so on. And then all of these people have families and children, and they live in the town. So the town service industries are supported by this university, and then government services depend on the university. So when you close a mill or a keystone ranch in an area, what you've done is you've taken away those 200 full professors, and everything else spirals into a deflationary spiral, and all activity just starts to slow down until it just dead ends and you get stasis. And nobody has any money. There's no money for government services. Schools start to fade away. The hospitals move. The whole thing just vanishes.
And the reason why you mentioned the closing of the mills, which we certainly have experienced here in Northern California, with any number of mills were forced to close. But in terms of the ranchers, the EPA regulations on how they can use their land and how they can graze the cattle and all of that are the things that force them to make their business smaller and smaller and eventually just get out.
Ranching has largely collapsed as a way to make a living. It has, and most ranchers they're in full-on struggle.
You have a figure here in some of the information about your book. It says 1,400,000 ranchers and livestock operations have been lost, despite prices and demand rising, while the number of acres of land held by land trusts and the number of land trusts themselves have gone up 500%.
Yeah.
And a land trust is where they take the land essentially off the market and nothing is done with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, one of the think tanks in Washington had my figures checked last week at the Statistical Services Institute at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and found that, in fact, my numbers were low. So it's actually more. And also, since I started in 1980, the prime number was 1980, we've added a third more people in the States. So, in fact, there should be a third more, not 50% less. So you can see how that would absolutely collapse rural America.
And have you found in your research and the people you've talked to in putting your terrific book together, and by the way, folks, I really urge you to take a look at it. It is just packed with shocking information, but you need to know it because, especially here in our area, we're constantly getting hit between the eyes with the fact that we have to have open space and green areas, and we have to reduce the sprawl, all of the words that are used to describe suburbia. And turn over your land, and the Nature Conservancy will protect it and take care of it. But they don't realize that they're driving up the cost of land to build houses.
Yes,
it never
exactly.
ends. It never ends.
Exactly, and the whole thing about smart growth and new urbanism is that and densification of urban areas is that it causes more pollution, more dirt, more noise, more conflict, and people don't want to live like that. They don't want to live like sardines packed into tin cans. Most people, when they reach so when after I graduated, got out of grad school, I went to New York, and I loved New York. For the first 7 years, it was heaven on earth. I was married, but the minute you start thinking about children, you don't want to live in that. I mean, it becomes sort of hellish almost. Because
it's a hard city to live in. I'm from New York. I was born there, but I also have lived there as a grown-up and worked there. It is a very hard life, and for me, at least, it's not where I would want to have a family.
Sure, the smaller cities and ex-urban areas are much more conducive to family growing and just a healthier life. So the notion that, which we all seem to believe, that we have to pack these cities filled with people and leave everything else pristine is absolutely wrong. Humans need to be in nature, and nature needs humans. Humans create gardens. In some cases, of course, there is industrial predation, but land recovers far faster than we think it does. And, in fact, the richer we are, the more we take care of land. I mean, now, for instance, I have a 16.5-acre plot of land, and because I can afford to, I can groom the fields, I can remove the invasive weeds, I have a salmon enhancement project at the foot of my creeks. I can spend those little bits of money to make it more biologically diverse because I love it. And humans generally, they love nature, so they should be allowed to experience it. This notion of corralling everybody and packing them into these matchbox houses because it's an ideal way to live is just wrong.
It's going on constantly, and we're being inundated with it here in the Bay Area, but I know it's national. One of the things that I've covered a lot over the years has been the wildfires. Brush fires, they're called different things in different parts of the country, range fires, etc., but they are horrendous, and clearly a lot of it has to do with the fact that the environmentalists will not allow dead trees to be taken from the forest. We have to leave them there because that's what nature would do. And of course, if they keep doing that and preventing fires, then all of a sudden when we have a fire, it's catastrophic.
Yeah, and as foresters say, we're just stacking up sort of metric tons of firewood around our communities and praying to God that nobody's gonna light a match. But what's happened is that forestry companies they managed their forests, so there would be 60 to 80 healthy trees per acre. Now there are 500 spindly, weak trees that are vulnerable to pests. They're undernourished. Their root systems are rotten, and so as a result, these trees are like little matchsticks sticking up. And I've seen these forests. You can't actually walk through the forest anymore. The trees are like so close together, and they're all gray, and there's a few little leaves or cedar things, but mostly they're dying.
They're dying. Have you ever gotten into a real debate with the people who are on the other side of your position, and how do they treat you? I would suspect they probably think you're some kind of a nut.
Well, we part of my book is my own experience with the Eco-Fascists here, who are pretty serious, and a lot of them are American, by the way.
Yes.
And so we beat them in the election last year, and
where is that specifically?
We're just north of Seattle on an island. You know the San Juan Islands?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we're called the Gulf Islands. It's the same archipelago. It looks very much the same. It's quite bucolic. It's pastoral. It's pretty, and it's filled with wealthy early retirees and rock stars and painters and the kind of people that generally can afford to live outside of the city.
Right.
So it's a beautiful place, and like many beautiful places, it's been taken over by the environmental movement. So we have on our 74 square miles, 90% of the island is not touched. Nobody's on it. Nobody goes to it, and we know that the forests are filling up with tinder, but there's no mitigation allowed because that doesn't fit with the idea of leaving nature alone and letting it go wild. And as a result, so we've lost most of our young families because they can't afford to buy a house or raise a family because it's so expensive. And, kids are enormously frustrated. The 20 and 30-year-olds who come here, they're country people. They love it. They might have grown up as urban people, but they want to live in the country, but they can't get a foothold. So our island is graying, and, our services are contracting. We lost our operating room last year, our schools. Wow. There are fewer people, and this is everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's working country. It's a categorization I invented, whether it's working country, whether it's logging or ranching or farming, or whether it's boutique country. You've got that all around you, I imagine.
Of course.
Yeah, Santa Cruz and places like that.
Yeah. And they're doing that everywhere. A lot of it comes from something that they're working on in our particular area is called the One Bay area, but it's a conglomeration of 9 counties where they're trying to force everybody into the infill housing, as you were mentioning before, and greening the environment and telling us the kinds of houses we can have. And it stems back, go back far enough, it goes back to the United Nations. You mentioned the Wildland Project. I remember when I talked about that 10 years ago on my program, people thought I was a conspiracy monger. It's a real thing. It does exist. It is a plan.
It's totally a real thing. And when I first ran into Agenda 21, I remember going up to a conference leader and saying, look, you guys have got to stop talking about this. It makes you sound crazy.
Yeah.
And, a year later, after I'd read into it, it was, they were right. Agenda 21 is the plan of the UN for the world for the century before the next century.
Mm-hmm.
It's their plan. And every NGO and agency of federal or state that works with the UN, and most of them do, have to sign on to the plan.
Right.
That's what they do. And all the Rockefeller Foundation, all the foundations sign on to it. And, you think, oh, well, that's just soft. And it's no, it's not soft.
Yeah.
It's intentional. It's intentional. They want us to live a certain way. And the way they want us to live is so controlled. It's completely controlled. There are going to be rules for everything. Everything. You will have no self-determination. You will have no agency. They will tell you whether you can plant a parsley patch there, whether you can put a bridge over your creek. Everything is going to be controlled.
I was looking again at some of the things that you write about in the book about the rural people being displaced or forced from their lands in North America, but you say and that's 40 million, more than 20 million indigenous people have been driven from their lands in the developing world, and the culprits are the World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and the UN's Conservation International. So they're doing this worldwide. It's not just, a plot to destroy America. This is being done everywhere.
Well, America, destroying America would be pretty much number one on their list. But
right.
Yes. It's happening. The analogy I make is that the clearances of the Native Americans who were here before Americans arrived, in terms of numbers, what the conservation movement has done to indigenous peoples all over the world is just disgusting. I mean, you can't read about this without saying...
Give us an example.
There are really hundreds of them. I think that Conservation International got into the Thai government about 20 years ago, and within a matter of 6 months, 8 national parks were created, and all of the indigenous peoples in those parks were told they had to leave. And that's typical. So what they'll do is so interesting. It's very clever. They'll go to Chase Manhattan.
Yeah.
And Chase Manhattan owns some debt in Ecuador. And they know they're never going to be paid back. So what they do is they donate it to the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy takes that debt, goes to Ecuador and says, look, we'll get rid of this totally, completely. Write it off. All you have to do is create a national park here. And of course, because it has to be pristine nature, you have to get rid of all those people. And so that the national government generally does the clearances while the Nature Conservancy or World Wildlife step aside. But nonetheless, these people are they're heartbroken. They're not educated. They just can't pick up and go down to Los Angeles and get another job.
Exactly.
They can't leave their lands. Their lands are like their heart.
What happens to them?
Well, apparently they walk into traffic. They're so disoriented. They just lie down in their tents and try to die.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and
bad.
they can't make a living in the quote civilized world because they haven't lived in that world before either. They didn't go to college. They don't. They can't read and write necessarily, and not all of them, but certainly I think the majority would have problems just fitting in. Can you stay with us a little bit longer?
Of course.
Okay, good. I'm going to put you on hold for just a second. We're going to take a break right now. If you have any questions you'd like to ask my guest, her name is Elizabeth Nickson, Elizabeth, last name Nickson. Barbara Simpson here at Hot Talk 560 KSFO. We're speaking with my guest, Elizabeth Nickson. Her book is called Eco-Fascists, How Radical Conservationists Are Destroying Our Natural Heritage And we're talking about some of these private organizations, but you also have to consider the role of the government in this. And there is a plan by the current administration's Obama. Man is running for re-election, remember, on Tuesday. The White House Rural Council. What are they up to with the Rural Council about inventorying private lands, etc., Elizabeth?
Well, apparently what they're doing is they're trying to figure out where all the water and the gravel and the resources are on private lands. And rural people believe that once they know what you've got, if they decide that you're not using it properly, they can use the Endangered Species Act or any of the other acts to take the property away from you and pay you off in some small amount of money and take you off your land.
And this is something that they have been doing on an ongoing basis, I suspect.
Yeah, and all the agencies are involved in it. The Defense Agency, the Army.
Wait. Why would the Defense and the Army be involved?
Well, that's what people want to know. They think it's being militarized, this White House Rural Council, so that there are going to be additional police powers attached to these new regulations that they'll be writing, or they are writing.
And this exists now. This is nothing that they're planning ahead. This is going on as we speak.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
It's amazing how that doesn't get talked about or reported on, isn't it?
It is, but it's so complex. I mean, it took me years to figure out a way to tell the story that it's understandable, because really what you're faced with is just stacks and stacks of paper, and all of the words on the paper seem to be intended to confuse. So there's a lot of sort of emotive language about, how, the land and caring for the land and caring for the creatures on the land and blah, blah, blah. And then you get into these sort of hopeful phrases about rejigging the economy so it's even better. But none of this has ever worked. All of it's failed. I mean, there's a wonderful town in Northern California called Crescent City.
Sure.
And where Redwood National Park is. And they've been experiencing this since the 70s, but in 1980, when the park was created, they started studying it and studying what happened to the people in that county and in that town over the ensuing years as they added more land to the park and said, oh, well, tourism is going to replace all those logging jobs, which we don't need anymore because the trees are so beautiful the way they are, and it's so much more positive to save them rather than log them. And they found, when the park was created, it's a working class town. It's logging, it's fishing, it's some ranching, it's farming.
Right.
And but people were healthy and they made a good living, and they sent their smart kids to college, and they paid for summer vacations and dentistry bills and retirements by themselves. But now they're a welfare county. 30% of the kids are under the poverty line. The only jobs anybody can get are $10 an hour. So I spent some time with the county council there, and he says men come to their offices. These are strong, healthy, independent people, and they're begging. They can't feed their families. They're begging for work. And that's what the movement does. And they did these fabulous studies. The National Park Service and the Sierra Club did these studies saying, there's going to be so many million tourists, and it's going to replace the economy. And 4.5% of the tourists that they projected actually turned up.
It's amazing. We have David calling from Windsor with a question that actually applies to kind of thing you're talking about now. So let's bring David in on this with Elizabeth Nickson here on KSFO. David, ask your question of my guest. Go ahead.
Thank you. As private lands are turned into public lands, that's going to reduce the tax base, the property tax base. And I'm curious how that fits into the equation, and if possible, what's the end game of all of this?
Well, don't really think they've thought it through. They don't really understand how the economy works, but somehow they think that there's going to be new industries, and I think the green jobs dream is mostly dead now. But for a long time, they actually thought that green jobs would replace the old jobs, and the fact is that in Del Norte County, 23% of the land now is private, so their property taxes are nothing. They're completely broke. Now there's this thing called PILT. It's called Payment in Lieu of Taxes, that the government is supposed to come up with to replace the lost property tax revenue. And sometimes it is paid, but only for 3 years, because after 3 years, tourism and green jobs are supposed to make up the slack.
Is this a federal program or a state?
It's both. It's in all the agencies, so if Fish and Wildlife shuts something down, they're supposed to, or Fish and Game.
I see.
So it's across all the agencies.
But they only do it for 3 years, and then after that, it's supposed to be self-sustaining, huh?
Yeah, and you have to fight for that money, too. So I have letters from California Fish and Game written to the Board of Supervisors saying, actually, this year we're not paying that. And they can't fight it. Some of the environmental NGOs, like Defenders of Wildlife, with the wolf reintroduction, are supposed to make up the difference for ranchers, but often they'll pay 1 year, and then you have to fight for that money. You have to fill out endless forms. You've got to go to meetings. You've got to make applications to bureaucrats. You can just piss away your life with applications to Defenders of Wildlife, and meanwhile your ranch is dying. If you've got a wolf pack in the area, within 2 years your calving rate goes from 85% to 50%, because your mother cows are so agitated they stop calving, and wolves like calves. They eat them from the tail up.
Right. And I have seen pictures, horrific pictures, of where a pregnant cow is attacked, and they gut the mother and eat the baby that was in the mother, and leave the carcass of the mother there. It just takes your breath away.
That's right, and wolf behavior is changing, as some scientists predicted it would. The reintroduced packs are finding that moving closer to town means their hunting is better and easier. Family pets are easier to bring down. Farm animals are easier to predate, and there are stories and news videos of women going out for a walk with their dogs and being surrounded by a pack of wolves. Now, we were told by the movement that wolves don't bother people. That was the propaganda that they pressed upon us. And it's true that wolves, if they're up in the Northwest Territories or northern Alaska, they don't.
Because there are not many people up there, for one thing, and there are enough things to hunt. You don't have to hunt people. But I have read diaries of some of the early settlers moving out, the pioneers in our country. And one of the ones that I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now, of a woman who was in her cabin. Her husband had gone somewhere else to try to get work, and she was trapped in the cabin, and the wolves were surrounding the cabin and on the roof and trying to get in. I mean, they were so incredibly aggressive, and it gave me chills when I read it. It gives me chills to think about it. But that is part of they're very clever animals.
They are, and like all animals, they'd rather eat easy than hard.
Sure, and we're making it easier for them, unfortunately.
There's a fascinating story, I think, that contributes to what happened.
Can you hold that thought for a second?
Sure.
Let me take a quick break, and as soon as we come back, you tell us that fascinating story, because I want to hear it too, right here on KSFO.
You're listening to Barbara Simpson on Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
Barbara Simpson here on KSFO. My guest is Elizabeth Nickson. Her last name is spelled Nickson. The book is called Eco-Fascists: How Radical Conservationists Are Destroying Our Natural Heritage, and published publisher is Broadside Books. It's new, just out a couple of weeks ago. Elizabeth, you were telling us about a fascinating story in line with what we were talking about, the wolves, etc.
Well, yes, the propaganda of the environmental movement in the 80s and early 90s, before wolf reintroduction began, I think was based on the findings of Soviet Russia. Soviet Russia, the government in Soviet Russia said that wolves do not attack humans, and because there were more people up there, I think those findings were stitched into the applications that were made to reintroduce wolves. And after the wall came down and people could actually get into the files of Soviet Russia, they found that they'd actually suppressed all the evidence of wolf kills in rural Russia. And there were hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds. And the reason that they didn't suppress this information was that they didn't want the rural population to have guns.
And they would want that for protection from the wolves.
That's right.
No question.
So these people they did not have weapons. They had no way of fighting them, and wolves did what they're doing here. They went after farm animals, and then they went after children, and then they went after the sick, and then they went after women. So what they've done with wolf reintroduction in the Americas is criminal. It's criminal. It is so wrong. These people are so vulnerable now, and their family wealth is vulnerable to it as well. And the movement calls wolf introduction a great success.
Yeah, they are. I just saw an article in the paper about that I clipped out when because I do a lot of environmental stories. We're almost out of time, but very briefly, talk a little bit about the removal of dams. It's something that I have talked about on my program, and I know you write about it in great detail in the book about the dams on the Klamath River, the largest dam removal in history. And quite frankly, I was astonished to see how the Native American tribes will really prosper as a result of taking these dams down. They hit the jackpot with that. Give us just a thumbnail of what's going on the dams.
Well, in Siskiyou, those 4 dams provide hydroelectric power to about 70,000 families and businesses. And some of the people I talk to in the Siskiyou think it's more like 140,000. So when the dams go out, they're going to have to import dirty coal electricity. I mean, half of your imports of energy in California is dirty coal. So that first of all, that's going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen is that they discovered with large dam removals that there are a lot of toxins in the bases of those dams. So when the dams come out, that just washes all over the farm and ranch land and through all the watersheds of everybody living there. And they found some pretty serious stuff in there, none of which has been properly studied. But some people have found hexavalent chromium in those dam released sludge, and that's the Aaron Brockovich chemical, and intestinal cancer rates have gone up around a dam removal in Oregon from 15% to 46% in 2 years.
That's that high?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite shocking when I read that. And of course what'll happen to all the ranches in the Siskiyou, which are the only part of the working economy left because they shut down the forests, is they will die too. I mean, they won't have enough water to water their ranges, to water their cattle, to even for themselves. So those counties will go to desert in 40 or 50 years.
There's a measure on the San Francisco ballot Tuesday that is whether they should look into removing the Hetch Hetchy Dam, which is the dam in Yosemite, which provides water for all of San Francisco, plus any number of other communities in this area. It is absolutely mind-boggling. I hope it doesn't pass, but knowing San Francisco, it probably will.
That one is absolutely insane. It's insane to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I discovered in reading into dam removal is that, the floods a couple of years ago that just decimated, what the Army Corps of Engineers was told by the movement, and certainly many of the people in the Army Corps of Engineers are environmentalists. They want the rivers to return to their natural flow.
Right.
So rather than releasing the water in stages, they let it build up until they couldn't stop it. And then they released it, and it just flooded that whole river valley. And in fact, that's intentional because they don't want people living there. Part of the reason that they want dams to be removed is to drive out the farmers that live downstream from those dams. Because they want rivers to go back to what they were before.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
Supposedly. Before they were people, or at least people of the kinds of industry that we have today. Just we're almost out of time, but just give me a quick thought on what do you think the EPA is going to do now that this horrible storm just attacked the East Coast, particularly New Jersey, and are they going to put their foot on the attempt to rebuild? That's what I think they'll do.
Yeah, I think they will. And any mitigation that would prevent something like this happening again, that would create barriers, they won't allow those to happen. I mean, when Greenpeace gets into city civil engineering, it's always makes it worse. It never makes it better. Yeah. It's a sociopathic movement, the environmental movement. It does not like people, and it wants to control us and constrict us and turn us into serfs.
Yeah, have you found any politicians with the guts to stand up against them?
Well, our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper here, he does. He stands up to them. He pulls us out of Kyoto, and he's opened up some of our lands, not very many acres, but some, to exploration and to mining and so on. But the entire media complex fights him at every turn.
I'll bet. And that happens in this country too.
Oh, I know it does. I mean, it's. I don't know why people are so afraid, because once you do stand up to them, they fade. Yeah. They're like bullies everywhere. But you have to stand up.
And it's very hard because people buy into the line. I mean, I know I've gone to meetings and you hear people, and they're just so naive about what's going on. They don't want to see it. They have this utopian view of what the world would look like if only we could get rid of those nasty people.
Yeah, I think they play on the emotions of the weak and of people who want the world to be different. Yeah. And it's all based in emotion. You can't use reason on the environmental movement supporters. They just don't. They abandoned reason long ago.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, what has been the response to your book now? It's been out several weeks. What's happening?
Nobody's attacked me yet.
Good.
And everybody has been really nice. Mm-hmm. I mean, people have been really complimentary and kind and supportive, and they.
And what about the people who don't agree with you?
I imagine if they even know it's happening, they're trying to ignore it.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to deal with it, and I mean, we fact checked this thing from here to Harper Collins has a great publishing staff, and the Harper Collins lawyer went through it over and over and over again, because we know what the movement does. I mean, what they can do now is lie about it, but they can't get us on the facts.
That's good. That's the most important thing on something like this, because your book is just absolutely packed with all kinds of wonderful information.